This short animation shows a good way to manage a product backlog. Since we're talking about backlogs, there are two important ones you should have in mind. The first is the iteration backlog. This is a list of the items a team believes it can complete during one iteration. The iteration backlog is owned by the team. This list is made at the start of every iteration by pulling items from another backlog, the product backlog. The product backlog is a list of all the items, stories, and features for the entire product and can feed the work of more than one team. It is owned by the product owner. This list must always be sized and ordered by priority. Usually, teams find that keeping items at the feature level in a product backlog is easier to work with than a long list of small stories. Features are collections of related stories and are generally delivered together. The items at the top of the priority list should be finer grained and more detailed. Items at the bottom should be less detailed and coarser grained. The items at the bottom of the priority list should have only just enough information to know what the item is about and roughly how big it is. Following the just-in-time principle, a team shouldn't spend time on details for items they won't work on for a long time or ever. This backlog is constantly changing, being reordered and sized based on new information about customer value, business value, and technical considerations. Keeping this product backlog in good shape is really too much work for just one person, so the product owner generally works on this in collaboration with the team. Let me show you a common way this is handled. Let's take a look at an iteration and see where this work fits in. As you know, an iteration is usually 2 weeks and has daily stand-ups throughout. It starts with an iteration planning meeting and ends with a showcase and retrospective. Most teams have another ritual that is organized by the product owner. This is called the Backlog Refinement meeting. It's also known as the Backlog Maintenance meeting or Backlog Grooming. This is a meeting managed by the product owner. Sometimes he or she meets with a couple key members of the team. And sometimes this meeting involves the whole team. If more than one team pulls work from this product backlog, the product owner will usually include representatives from each team. These representatives should be people who do work on the team. The iteration manager may not be the best person for this. How this is organized is up to the team and the product owner. Generally, 3 main things are done during this meeting. First, stories or features can be added to the product backlog. The product owner brings new ideas to the team. They discuss just enough detail to quickly come up with a high-level sizing. Often, this is done using planning poker. Then the product owner adds the new item to the ordered list. The second thing is that items can be dropped. It's wasteful to have items taking up mental and physical space on the backlog that never seem to move up the priority list. Just remove them. They can be added back later if necessary. The third thing teams do during this backlog refinement meeting is elaborate. They elaborate stories by documenting details about the story. Now, it wouldn't make sense to get into a lot of detail on all the items in the backlog. Generally, a team will estimate which stories are likely to be done in the next 2 iterations by teams pulling from this backlog. Remember, stories are just placeholders for conversation. This is the main place this conversation happens, where shared understanding between the team and product owner begins. This conversation will continue until the story is complete, but the foundations are laid here. The goal of elaboration is to get the stories ready for the iteration planning meeting. A story that's not ready for the iteration planning meeting will slow things down and could be rejected by the team. One way to determine if a story is ready is by using the INVEST model. The I in INVEST means independent. A story should be able to be implemented without depending on another story, Sometimes it takes adjustments of stories to achieve this. The N in invest means negotiable. A story shouldn't be so highly defined that a team has no room for innovation. The V means valuable. A story should most often produce some end-user value, although sometimes technical stories which produce foundational value for other stories might not fit this criteria, and that's okay, but try to see some end customer value whenever possible. The E in invest means estimable. In order to be ready for iteration planning, a team must be able to make a good estimate of its size for forecasting, whether they can handle it in an iteration. S means small. It's not advisable for a story to take more than half an iteration, and generally it's better if it's even smaller than that. Small pieces of work help produce a steady flow. Teams should work to get better and better at making their stories small. And lastly, the T means testable. A story must have enough detail and acceptance criteria to run a test against it to determine when it's actually complete. In order to elaborate these stories, the team will discuss the details with the product owner and among themselves, and then record this information in the story. They will add any acceptance criteria they learn about. These are the details the story must include. Once all this detail is known, the team will check to see if they still agree with the earlier estimate. Is this bigger or smaller than they originally thought? Or does this story need to be broken into more than one story or combined with others? That's how stories are elaborated in backlog refinement meetings. When all this is done, the top 2 iterations of stories are now ready for the iteration planning meeting, and the product backlog refinement is complete.